Recorded.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the December 13th, 2022 meeting of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board. It's approximately 1:01. I'd like to start by calling the roll. Charisse, can you do that?
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Here.
Ms. Kaiser?
Here.
Mr. Borges?
Here.
Ms. Chang? Ms. Dominguez?
Here.
Dr. Valdez? Dr. White?
Here.
We have 5 members present.
Okay, so I believe we have established a quorum. I'd like to ask now for public comment for items not on the agenda. If we can open up for public comment.
Certainly. This is the moderator, and we are opening up WebEx's Q&A function to facilitate public comment. If you would like to make a comment, you may look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right corner of your computer screen. And then in the text box there, you can type the word comment. We're showing instructions on the screen as well. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. The other option for anyone is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, which is also at the bottom of the WebEx screen. And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'd like to move on to agenda item 3, discussion and possible action to amend and adopt regulations regarding uniform standards related to substance abusing licensees as stated in Title 16 CCR sections 1399.102, 131, 131.1, 155, and 155.1. I believe Maria Lorenzo is going to start the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Raggio. This is Mary Lorenzo. Those proposed changes will require that the board use the uniform standards when disciplining substance abusing licensees and incorporates by reference DCA's uniform standards document. The 45-day public comment period began on September 30th, 2022 and ended on November 15th. The board did not hold a meeting for this proposed regulatory action, nor was there one requested from anyone interested or their authorized representative. The board received 4 written comments during the 45-day public comment period. 2 were in support and 2 had no comments. The Administrative Procedure Act does not require the board to respond to written comments and support during the final rulemaking process, but the board is required to respond to written comments that object or make recommendations regarding the regulatory action or the procedures followed by the board in proposing the regulatory action. Currently, the board is not recommending changes to the regulatory proposed regulations due to the comments. And so we provide a detailed a summary of the comments as well as board responses drafted to respond to those comments.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Of course, we've already looked at this issue before, voted on it before is my recollection. Is there any further discussion about the information provided to us about the public comments or any other element for that matter? I'm not seeing any board questions. Is that correct? No board questions?
That's correct.
Okay, seeing none, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
Certainly, and we are opening up the Q&A for public comment. If you have a comment on this agenda item, you may look for the question mark icon, type the word comment into the text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, thank you. I apologize. I jumped over a step. We do need to ask for a motion and second on this agenda item. And if I can draw your attention to page 2 of 2, under tab 3, you'll see suggested motion language. The action requested is that the board review and discuss the materials, and we want to determine whether or not we want to approve the board's response as currently drafted or propose additional changes, and direct staff to finalize the rulemaking process. So would anybody like to make a motion on this item?
Yes, this is Holly Kaiser. I'd be happy to make that motion.
Okay, as written, as stated here, or do you want to read that?
Yeah, I can read it. Yes. I move to approve the proposed board responses to comments and direct staff to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking process, including the filing of the final rulemaking package with the Office of Administrative Law, authorize the executive officer to make any non-substantive changes to the proposed regulations before completing the rulemaking process, and adopt the proposed regulations at Title 16 CCR sections 1399.102, 1399.131, 1399.131.1, 1399.155, and 1399.155.1 as noticed.
Do I have a second?
Second. This is Todd.
Michael, do we need to open for public comment again at this point?
Yes, we should on the motion, Madam Chair.
Okay. Can we do that again? Thank you.
Certainly, and we've reopened the Q&A feature. And if you would like to make a comment on the motion, you may look for the question mark icon, type the word comment in the text box and click send, or raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And I see no requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on this issue. Are there any further discussion? Seeing none, can I ask Sharice to call the roll, to call the vote, excuse me.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Dr. White.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4, discussion and possible action to adopt regulations regarding notice to consumers as stated in Title 16 CCR sections 1399.129 and 1399.157.1. Again, I think Ms. Lorenzo is going to introduce this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Raggio. This proposed regulation will require licensees to provide notice that they are licensed and regulated by the board. The 45-day public comment period began on September 9th and ended on October 25th. The board did not hold a hearing, nor was one requested from the public. The board received 12 written comments during this period, 3 in support, 6 expressed concerns with the proposed regulatory changes, 2 in oppositions, and 1 had no comments. The board approved modifications to the proposed text on October 28th, which modifies the font size to one of the method of notice from 48 to 36 point type. On November 18th, 2022, the board issued a 15-day notice of the availability of modified text, and the public comment period closed on December 5th. The board received 8 written comments concerning the modifications to proposed text. Again, APA does not require the board to review or respond to positive comments in support of this regulatory action. However, the board is required to respond and review written comments that objects or make recommendations. Board staff does not have any proposed changes to the text, and so we provide a summary of the comments and a board response as drafted. And we do have a motion for this if there are any changes to a motion as currently drafted, or changes can be added to any of the board's responses. I do want to note that for this one, we did receive a lot of comments regarding the method of notice. So as part of attachments, we included all option. That way everyone can see what it would look like visually if someone else wanted to do a different form of notice. And that I am done with my report.
Thank you. I wonder if I could ask Paul to provide just a little more history on the evolution of this issue, because he explained it to me and I thought it was very helpful to understand that a little better. Paul, would you be able to say a little more?
Yes, most certainly. Just in your comments, one of our responses kind of talked about the statutory authority for this regulation, and that's Business and Professions Code Section 138, which requires boards to initiate the process of adopting regs to require licensees to provide notice to their clients or customers that the practitioner is licensed by the state. The important thing, I think, to note here is this is not just putting your license up on the wall to tell someone that you're licensed, but this is a way to raise consumer awareness that a regulatory board exists that regulates a certain license type. And I think in our case, it's really important that people know, that consumers know that all three license types are regulated by the board, especially when we talk about, complaints, whether they be in the school system with licensees that are licensed by the board, assistants that are licensed by the board that are not under the jurisdiction of the CTC, or if we're talking about hearing aid dispensers or audiologists or any other type of assistant. It's really important that consumers know that, and that may also impact the number of complaints that we get, and we realize that's also a concern. But that's why we exist, is for consumer protection. So we do feel strongly that this is something that that should happen, that people should know, that the licensing board regulates the license types that we oversee.
And BPC Code 138 has been long standing, which you can see on page 3 of 7, that requires this. That's correct, and we're just now implementing this long-standing requirement. Is that correct, Paul?
Yes, we're catching up on our regulations, as you all know, and Business and Professions Code 138. I believe it went into effect the most recent version on January 1st of 2020, but I think it was added to the stats as far back as 1998. So I think that this is something that we're catching up on. And when you go to several, clinics or hospitals, you'll start to notice that there are these kinds of notices up for consumers to see.
A common complaint, which I thought the staff addressed well, is that they were feeling that we were the only board that was requiring this, and none of the other healing arts or medical boards were requiring it. And I think he responded to that well by saying that's not the case. That there's actually quite a number, and there will be even more complying with this very soon. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I know when we started talking about this a few years back, and when we talked about this at a previous board that I was at, that's when I started to notice them. When I went into clinics, I started noticing various professions that have these signs up. So we're a little bit behind in that area. I think my other response to that is, just because other licensees don't do it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. Yeah, that's certainly not the right perspective either.
Right. Let's see. Sharice, do you have your hands up?
Yeah, I just wanted to also clarify, a lot of the boards have, kind of their ability to put their own stamp on these regulations, just like we have, right? So you have 3 different methods you can use. It can be a sign in a publicly available space, or it can go in the receipt. So there's different ways that people can put them on there. So you may not always see the sign in the lobby. It might also be, in the hearing aid receipt. It's going inside of the contract or something like that, or on a discharge notice if people work in a hospital. There's a lot of different ways, and each board has their own method. So some have different language, different signs, different size, font sizes. But there are a variety out there. You'll notice them more once you think about it and go there. But a lot of the other boards already have these notices on their website. Psychology and medical board, dental board, board of behavioral sciences. So there's quite a few that have them out there, and they have their signs available for licensees to print out if they want on that webpage, or licensees can just follow with Arial Point font and make up their own sign if they'd like to make something slightly more visually pleasing, as long as it meets the requirement of font size and the text that's in there. So always options. And I think we got 3 pretty good ones, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, thank you. I have one comment on the page 607. It's one of the comp board responses. And the statement is that the comment doesn't have anything to do with the rulemaking package at hand, but it does go on to say it looks like the second sentence, the board is unable to require sellers of OTC hearing aids to post this notice because the FDA does not permit state and local government laws to interfere with the sale of OTC hearing aids from those not licensed with the board. So it does state it there, but what is not implicit is that there are going to be licensees who sell OTC hearing aids, and they will still be required to do this. So I think we have to keep in mind that there will be licensees who fall under this requirement. Is there any other discussion from the board? Okay, seeing none, if you want to look at page 7 of 7, the action required is staff recommends the board review and discuss the provided materials. The board may wish to determine whether or not to approve the board's response as currently drafted or propose additional changes and direct board staff to finalize the rulemaking process. So right under there is a suggested motion language if anybody would like to make this motion.
Sure, my turn.
Sure.
I move to approve the proposed board responses to comments and direct staff to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking process, including the filing of the final rulemaking package with the Office of Administrative Law, authorize the executive officer to make any non-substantive changes to the proposed regulations before completing the rulemaking process, and adopt the proposed regulations at Title 16, CCR sections 1399.129 and 1399.157.1 as noticed.
I second.
Okay, great. Can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
Certainly. And we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If you would like to make a comment on the motion, you can look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen, and hit that, and then type the word comment into the text box and click send. The other option for requesting to be recognized for comment is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, which is usually located at the bottom of the WebEx screen or behind the 3-dot other options if you are on a mobile device. And I do not see any requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the table for this item. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I would like to ask Charisse to call the vote.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Dr. White.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Charisse. Okay, let's move to agenda item 5, discussion and possible action to amend regulations regarding required professional experience, direct supervision requirements, and telesupervision as stated in Title 16 CCR sections 1399.153 and 153.3. Sharice, I believe you're going to introduce this topic.
Yes. So for the RPE direct supervision requirements and telesupervision, the board approved the regulatory language for this package on October 8th, 2021. We received 44 comments during the initial 45-day public comment period from August 5th through September 20th of 2022. The board modified the regulatory text on October 28th, 2022. An additional 15-day public comment period ran from November 7th, 2022 to November 23rd, 2022. And their board received 7 additional comments. Board staff has drafted proposed responses to the public comments for your review and approval. So we did try to combine as much as we could. The board received 32 comments indicating general support for allowing telesupervision. The board appreciates the support and believes the proposed changes will provide greater flexibility in meeting the monthly supervision requirements, so there's no additional changes recommended after that. The board received 3 public comments requesting the board allow 100% telesupervision for RPE temporary licensees. The commenters raised concerns regarding speech-language pathologists and the lack of speech-language pathologists for in-person supervision, as well as health and safety concerns. And I'm sorry, moderators, if you could have attachment 5B available on the screen on page 1. So those were the summaries of comments on pages 1 and 2. And for the comment of allowing 100% telesupervision, the board rejects the response that we are suggesting is that the board rejects these comments. The board discussed allowing 100% telesupervision and decided that some in-person supervision is necessary to establish trust and rapport between the RPE supervisor and the RPE temporary licensee. In-person supervision also allows the RPE temporary licensee to pick up on nonverbal cues from the RPE supervisor during sessions that can help shape behavior. The board received 2 public comments urging that all supervision hours should be allowed to be completed through telesupervision for licensees working for teletherapy-based companies. That was very specific. The commenters raised concerns that it's counterproductive to make supervisors sit in the room to supervise a teletherapy session, and in-person supervision becomes a hindrance rather than a benefit when teletherapy is being utilized. The suggested response to that comment is that the board rejects these comments. The board discussed allowing 100% telesupervision and decided that some in-person supervision is necessary to establish trust and rapport between the supervisor and the RPE licensee. So similar comment as the one above, and no special provision just for teletherapy-based companies. The board received 1 public comment urging that all supervision hours should be allowed to be completed through telesupervision if in-person supervision is not allowed by the facility or hospital for reasons such as disease outbreak. And a very similar response as well. But in addition, in cases of public health emergencies such as the COVID-19 pandemic, there are laws in place that allow the governor to have emergency orders, and provisions of the law can be waived just like they were during the COVID-19 pandemic. The board also received 1 public comment seeking clarification if the RPE temporary licensee can document the patient consent, or if the RPE supervisor must do the documentation. The board appreciated that comment, and that change was the regulatory change was clarified regarding obtaining patient consent. With the use of telehealth, the RPE temporary licensee may be in the same physical location as the patient and/or patient's record, and it would be more efficient to allow the RPE temporary licensee to document the consent. The board modified that text, and that's what went out in the 15-day public comment. The board also received one public comment that there should be a limit to the number of speech therapy sessions a practitioner can conduct when providing speech therapy sessions in a school. The board rejects this comment as student caseloads are not germane to this rulemaking package and would need to be addressed in a separate regulatory proposal. The board received one public comment urging that there should not be a requirement to attend live continuing education hours. The board rejected this comment as continuing education requirements are not germane to this rulemaking package. There was also one public comment stating that the regulatory proposal is not efficient and may increase the cost of the license. And the board rejected this comment since the board has made a determination that the proposed regulatory action will not have a significant statewide adverse economic impact on licensees or businesses. And the determination is based on the regulatory proposal providing licensees with the ability to utilize telesupervision to meet a portion of the RPE direct monitoring, but it does not make telesupervision mandatory. So the next public comment, I lost my place, sorry. Received was urging that there should be an option to opt out of providing personal information such as email addresses, phone numbers, and home address. The board rejected this comment as requiring disclosure of personal information is not germane to this rulemaking package and would have to be addressed in a separate proposal. We also received a comment in support of allowing 50% telesupervision. We appreciate the support, but we don't need to make any changes for that. The board received one public comment in support of patient-informed consent for the use of telesupervision, and our response is to that we appreciate the comment as well. The board received two public comments in support of telesupervision for SLPAs, and the board rejects this comment because that the supervision of SLPAs or speech-language pathology assistance is not germane to this rulemaking package, and it is addressed in a separate regulatory package that the board is working on. The board received one public comment seeking clarification on telesupervision for students and speech-language pathology assistance. The board rejected that comment as the supervision of students and speech-language pathology assistance is not germane to this rulemaking package, and it's addressed elsewhere. The board also received a public comment at the October 28th board meeting requesting the board allow 100% telesupervision. The board rejects that comment, and as discussed, allowing 100% telesupervision was not the decision of the board. Then for the 15-day public comment, we received additional comments. There were two in general support for allowing telesupervision for up to half of the hours. The board appreciates that comment. The board received two public comments requesting, again, allowance of 100% telesupervision for RPE temporary licensees. The board again rejects these comments. Same reasons as prior of building trust and rapport and the need to pick up on nonverbal cues. The board received one public comment that RPE supervisors don't maintain student files and usually do not have direct contact with the student's parents, which would make it difficult for RPE supervisors to obtain patient consent. The board rejects this comment because the board modified the regulatory text in section 1399.153.3 to allow either the RPE supervisor or RPE licensee holder to document the consent. And I'm sorry, moderators, if you can go to attachment 5C, page 1, that shows the summary of these. And then the board received another public comment concerning the RPE supervisor's legal responsibility for the health, safety, and welfare of the patients treated by the RPE. Specifically, the commenter is concerned that RPE supervisors could be held liable for accidents or illnesses that occur at the home or on the school playground or in the hospital lobby. And the board rejects this comment because it is not directed at the proposed changes in this rulemaking and thus is outside of the scope of the rulemaking. But additionally, existing law holds an RPE supervisor legally responsible for patients being treated by the RPE temporary license holder. Holding a supervisor responsible for the acts of a supervisee is not a new standard, but a constituent part of the relationship between a supervisor and supervisee. The Department of Consumer Affairs boards hold supervisors legally responsible in this way because the licensed supervisor knows the standards of practice while the supervisee is still learning. Supervisors are legally responsible for the care that their supervisees provide to patients for the protection of the public. And you can see Davis versus Physician Assistant Board in 2021. That's also in the memo on page 5. This is consistent with the way all supervisees, interns, trainees, and all other staff are regulated in the professions regulated by the Department of Consumer Affairs. Reducing the standard of supervisor responsibility would decrease consumer protection and directly contradict the board's public protection mandate. The board also received a public comment urging the board to limit telesupervision on a quarterly basis rather than a monthly basis. And okay. And the commenter states that this will provide greater flexibility for the supervision to be conducted entirely in person in 1 month and entirely via telesupervision the next month. The commenter also states that this change may reduce the need for travel for in-demand healthcare workers while preserving the requirement that at least half of the supervision be carried out in person. Now, for this one, we've actually created 2 separate responses for the board to consider. And one would require additional 15-day notice and go along with the modified yellow highlighted changes in attachment A, which is the text, so that it would allow quarterly, the 50% to be a quarterly requirement rather than a monthly requirement. So these are the 2 different proposed responses on page 6. The board appreciates this comment and is proposing changes to section 1399.153.3 C1A to change the telesupervision limit from 4 hours per month to 12 hours per quarter for full-time RPEs and 2 hours per month, and from 2 hours per month to 6 hours per quarter for part-time RPEs. The board agrees this change will provide flexibility for RPE temporary licensee holders and RPE supervisors to alternate in-person supervision and telesupervision each month while still maintaining limits on the use of telesupervision. The alternative would be if the board does not want to move to a quarterly limit and wants to keep the monthly limit. The board rejects this comment, and the board believes in-person telesupervision is necessary to establish trust and rapport between the RPE supervisor and the RPE temporary licensee. In-person supervision allows the RPE temporary licensee to pick up on nonverbal cues from the RPE supervisor during sessions that can help shape behavior, and for these reasons, in-person supervision should take place each month. So that is one of the potential changes the board can consider, is whether or not to move the provision of 50% of the hours per month to be telesupervision to 50% of the hours per quarter being telesupervision. The other item is a late public comment that the board received, and that's in attachment D, 5D. And this one is urging that all supervision hours be completed through telesupervision. And they raise concerns that it's counterproductive to make supervisors sit next to the RPE and observe them providing services via telepractice. And stated that telepractice has led to higher attendance for patients and increased participation of caregivers. And the board recommends the response that the board rejects this comment, and the board discussed allowing 100% telesupervision and decided that some in-person supervision is necessary, again, to establish trust and build rapport and to pick up on nonverbal cues. So sorry, that was really, really long, but we got the most comments on that one. So the board, what staff is recommending is a discussion on whether or not the comment on the quarterly limit of telesupervision, so limiting it 50% per quarter versus 50% per month, and to discuss that, and based on whether or not the board wants to make a change or not, we would make different motions.
So right now, the current suggested motion has to do with accepting the comments and not changing any of the particular language. So are you saying, Charisse, that we would then not entertain that motion, but yet a different one to accept the timing of the supervision issue?
if the board members believe that they should. One of the considerations is remote locations and the difficulty of getting supervisors out there all the time, as well as health and safety issues that could prevent the 50% in-person telesuper or 50% in-person supervision in a month, but that might be easier met on a quarterly basis.
Okay, so let's let the board members respond if they wish to.
Hi, this is Todd. Personally, I am not a fan of moving it to quarterly. They could basically go 3 months without seeing them in person at all and just cram it all in the last month. And I think that is completely opposite of the intent of what we're trying to do and making sure they have some supervision and some in-person contact with their supervisor.
This is Gilda. I agree that the in-person supervision should take place each month for consistency's sake. Again, also making sure that they're not bundling that supervision up towards the end of the quarter when maybe realizing that they're short on hours, for example. I think it needs to be consistent because they get that consistent feedback and observation throughout.
Thank you, Gilda. I'd be curious to hear from Holly as well. I'm sorry, Todd, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, I was just agreeing with Gilda. Consistency is very critical, I think.
Holly, do you have a thought about this that you'd like to express?
It's interesting because when I first read this comment, I thought, gee, I like it a lot. And, and of course, I think about how ASHA, I know we're not ASHA by any means, but it's done by segment, which in school districts that equates to looking at 3-month segments rather than every week or every month type of thing. I was trying to understand this better because on the page 3 of 4, number E, reviewing and evaluating the RPE temporary license holder's performance on a monthly basis. So there we're talking about reviewing them on a monthly basis. I was trying to understand if that says monthly, does that mean there still has to be contact monthly, but that this clause where this item we're talking about is just specific to the telesupervision piece. So I'm a little confused about that. Maybe Sharice, you could help me with that. What this really means. Yeah,
it would not get rid of the requirement that there's 8 hours a month of direct supervision,
Mm-hmm.
but it would limit the amount of telesupervision based on a quarterly system.
But
so they'd still do 8 hours of direct supervision per month,
right?
But they could kind of divvy out where they're doing telesupervision.
Right. So if that's the way I was understanding it. So then maybe the comments, maybe Gilda and Todd can go back to what you've just said, because even if we decided we would like to make the telesupervision more flexible, they still would be getting that direct contact every month. It's just the telesupervision could be spread out differently across the year.
And I would agree with you, Holly. That's kind of the way I was thinking of it. I thought the flexibility on a quarterly basis for the tele 50% was okay based on the fact that there was still a monthly direct supervision requirement, which is separate, right, from whether it be tele or in person.
Mm-hmm.
So then I guess I need to have a little bit better, if they're required to do 8 hours every month, no matter what,
Mm-hmm.
then what is the addition of the telesupervision that they can then do 50% versus in person?
So, either way, they have to do 8 hours. So right now, the way it's written, it's 8 hours per month, no matter what, but 50% of those could be telesupervision. So it could be 4 and 4, right?
Okay, so then they don't have to do 8 hours of in-person a month. It has to be physically in person 4 of those 8 could be through telesupervision, not in-person supervision.
Yes. And so if you went to a quarterly system, you'd still have 8 hours per month of direct supervision required, but you could be doing those 8 hours. Let's just use January. 8 hours in January were telesupervision, but you did your 8 hours in February in person. And then you did 50-50 in the month of March, right? So you're still kind of divvying it up that way. But it just allows them to divvy up when they might need to do the telesupervision. And that, maybe it's, illness or whatever, or public health things or whatever. For 1 month, that's been an issue at your school or location or whatever. But the next month would have to be in person. So that it would just change how much telesupervision is allowed based on the quarterly versus a monthly system. But either way, 8 hours per month is required.
Yeah,
right. But you could still do 2 months of nothing but telesupervision and then make up the in-person on the back 2 months.
Yes.
Well, overall, they could never do more than 50% of all their required direct supervision hours in telesupervision. Of course, you can always do more, but it's being able to bundle it. Maybe 1 month they just do telesupervision, but that's still considered direct. It's specific that you're allowed to do 50% of the direct is telesupervision. I personally like it, although I'm wary about putting out everything out there again and delaying. We have to really make sure it's. I wasn't sure how that looks because once this goes out for public comment, there can again be comments on everything again. Correct?
The comments have to be specific to the, and I think Kara can probably say it better than I can, but that when you put out a modified text, it has to be on the modified text, not on the original text. It's just on what's changed.
Okay, well, that's helpful to me.
I'm sorry. Can I clarify, Todd? It would be quarterly, so it'd be January, February, March. If you did 1 month of telesupervision, 1 month of in-person, that third month would have to be 50-50 because it's a 6 hours per quarter. So yeah.
Right.
So you could cram some, but you probably would have to divvy it up in one of those months.
Right.
But technically, you can have 1 month where there is no in-person.
Correct. Okay. It could be a month of telesupervision.
I think that leans towards the initial comment that I had, that you could say, for example, with your months, it could be 8 hours in person in February, and then you have the 50-50 mix. Well, January, say 8 hours in person in January, and then February a 50-50 mix, and then March there's no in person at all. I still think that having the in person scattered across the month versus a quarter allows for consistency of giving input and feedback based on being able to pick up on those behaviors that you're trying to shape in the clinician based on the patient or the client's response.
Todd?
And I honestly, I don't think telesupervision, remote supervision isn't, even if I can use the pun, remotely as effective as in-person supervision. And I think the in-person supervision is critical. So I'm just not a fan of someone being able to just go a whole month without having any direct supervision at all. I don't think that's effective supervising. I just don't think that's an effective way to manage your staff and make sure that they're taking care of their patients the way they need to.
This is Holly. Todd, I get your point. I think what's happened is when you're saying no direct, I think you mean you want them to have they have to have in person, because again, direct here is the confusing word, right?
Yes,
okay.
Right. In person, excuse me.
Yeah.
I know when we start throwing around direct, indirect, and all that other kind of stuff. Right?
Exactly. That happens to me all the time.
Yes, in person versus telesupervision.
And I think we also have to take in consideration that there are multiple locations and types of services that that the clinicians are working in. It's not just one area. For example, it's not all schools. There's hospitals. There's freestanding clinics, private practices. So I think all of them need to be considered when making this decision.
So I have another comment. So I really appreciate your input, Gilda and Todd. And this is more of a wording question. In letter B on page under the responsibilities of RPE supervisors, letter B, the second line, it says under the supervisor's supervision. And again, on the next page, D5, it's supervisor supervision. Is supervisors a necessary word there? Maybe Charisse can address that.
I think that I think you kind of have to have it there. It does seem rather redundant, but we also don't name the RPE supervisor something else. So, and B, we're not changing much of that text either in there.
Okay.
But the other one, what was the other section you mentioned?
It was both. Well, the first was on the first page under B, and the second page, it's the same basic thing under D5.
D5.
I just thought it was obvious that it's the supervisor supervision. That's the only reason I was bringing it up, but just
yeah.
Okay.
And that's because we're also moving away from using where is it at? Calling it supervision instead of direct monitoring, calling it direct supervision. So yeah, it just kind of makes it a little wonky, but it's the right one.
Okay.
So it looks as though there are some board members who are comfortable with making this change to quarterly telesupervision issue and others that aren't. So I'm not sure if that suggests that we're not able to adopt the comments at this point, or do we want to develop a different motion?
I'd like to say that I feel comfortable following Gilda and Todd's lead on the comments. And again, this was a kind of a new idea, and I thought this sounds interesting. I could see how it could work, but I really appreciate the input about the different settings, and we want to be as protective of the consumer as necessary. So I'd be in favor of keeping it with monthly and not quarterly.
And I would agree. I don't think it's worth preventing moving forward with the telesupervision change.
Okay. So
can I draw your attention then to page 607 and 707 with the ideas that we're going to accept the comments?
Yes, so that would be the second suggested motion on page 7.
So the first one is that we're going to review those comments, which we did in detail, and move to approve. You can see on 707 the suggested motion language. If somebody would like to move this forward.
I can. I move to approve the proposed responses to public comments as outlined in this memo. Direct staff to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking process. Delegate authority to the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the proposed regulations or the responses to comments that may be required in completing the rulemaking file, and adopt the proposed regulatory changes as noticed.
Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, can the moderator open for public comment?
Certainly, and we are opening up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. If you have a question or if you have a comment on this agenda item, you may look for the question mark icon in the lower right of your WebEx screen. Type the word comment into that text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand to ask to be recognized and comment. Each commenter will have 3 minutes with a 30-second warning. And I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'd like to ask Sharice to call the vote.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Dr. Valdez,
Aye.
Dr. White.
Aye.
And the motion carries.
Thank you. So moving on to agenda item 6, future agenda items. Can I ask if there are any items that you'd like to see on future agendas? Not seeing any from the board. Michael, do we need to open for public comment on that issue?
We do.
Okay.
And we have opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If anyone has a request for a future agenda item, they may look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen, or behind the 3-dot other options if you're on a mobile device. Type the word comment into that text box and click send, or you may raise your hand. We do have a raised hand from someone logged into WebEx as Michelle. And Michelle, I will be sending you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes. And Michelle, did you get a pop-up saying unmute me? There you go, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I was popping in because I'm not sure if it's necessarily, it's kind of a question / it might be for the next possible meeting. Just the process on the approval for the RPE licenses in general. I understand that it has to go through, we have to check everything, do the background checks, make sure everyone's graduating, getting their licenses, passing the boards. But I wanted to just bring up comment regarding the length of time it takes, and it does impact the ability for our clients to receive therapy services and for our CFs to start therapy. I'm not sure if this is something that's been brought up or discussed in the past, but is there a possibility of, I'm sure it would take quite a bit to update it or change it. Is there a way to move it a little quicker? Has that ever been brought up? Is that a possibility?
Well, thank you for your comment. Typically, that kind of issue is addressed in the executive officer's report. So I believe that information will arise in a future agenda item.
Okay, and so if this topic does come up in a future agenda, I would just kind of keep my eye open on the emails and see if this is added to an upcoming meeting.
Yes.
Yes, and Madam Chair, this is Paul Sanchez. Since we're talking about specifically future agenda items, I would encourage this member of the public, they can go ahead and write to the board. You can send us an email on our board email, and we can answer these questions, or we can create an agenda item, make sure that we're covering this in a future report. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I see no other requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Todd, do you have your hand up, or is that still from last time? Okay.
Nope, just still from last time.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 7, which is closed session. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any items to discuss in closed session, so we don't really need to go into that. But so we're getting close to adjournment. I want to thank everybody for all their hard work this year, from the staff to the board members, and wish everybody happy holidays. Any other
Happy holidays.
Yeah, it's looking forward to actually maybe seeing people in person next year.
Great. Happy holidays.
Thank you all for getting on this call and on short notice and everything. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
have a happy new
Have
year.
a safe holiday and happy new year, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
It's adjourned.